We begin Newsweek with matters of the economy. This week, the embattled former governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, pleaded not guilty to allegations of printing 684.5 million naira notes with 18.96 billion naira. Mr. Emefiele defended himself during his arraignment at the Federal High Court, Abuja, by the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission on a 4-count charge. After pleading not guilty before the court, Justice Anene granted Godwin Emefiele bail of 300 million naira alongside 2 sureties in like sum who must be residents of Nigeria. The judge added that Mr. Emefiele should be remanded at the Kuje Correctional Center till his bail conditions are met. The case was adjourned to the 28th and 29th of May for commencement of trial. Now, joining us to discuss this is Chino Obiagu, a senior advocate of Nigeria, and he joined us via Zoom. Thank you so much, Mr. Obiagu, for joining us. And let's get into this quickly. Explain to us the EFCC's allegations against the former CBN governor, Emefiele. What evidence has been presented?
Well, it's mind-boggling, the amount being used to print, billions of naira used to print 680 million value of tender. It's not cost-effective, it is not prudent, and I think it's on that basis that the EFCC thinks there's a fraud. But it goes beyond that kind of imprudence. Being imprudent and not being non-cost-effective does not make it criminal. So the EFCC had to provide evidence that there were some misuse of funds or misappropriation of funds, or even in the contracting process, why this huge sum was used to print the legal tender of 600 million of value. So we've not seen the proof of evidence. It depends on what evidence the FCC has against Mr. Emefiele.
But what are the legal implications that a no guilty plea carry for the former CBN governor and for the case going forward?
Oh, well, the implication is that the EFCC is now put, to the burden of proving the case. Because once a defendant pleads not guilty, what it means is that he has challenged the prosecution to go ahead and prove his guilt. So EFCC now has a responsibility to call witnesses, to tender evidence, to prove there was a misappropriation of funds, there was fraud, and there was an intention to defraud the nation. It is not enough to say that it was a bad policy, because we all know that that was the Naira redesign policy of the CBN, which was widely criticized by everybody, including ourselves, and through our medium. We said the Nigerian Bar Association stood against it because it created a lot of suffering for Nigerians. But beyond that, we can also see that it created some suffering for the economy, because the amount being used to print the redesign was really mind-boggling. So EFCC need to go beyond proving that it was a bad policy to showing that there was some offenses committed. And that pleading not guilty means it has challenged the EFCC to prove his guilt in the court of law.
Twice now you have described this as mind-boggling. I mean, talk to us some more about the significance of printing 684 million naira, with 18.96 billion naira has been alleged by the EFCC.
Yes, it is mind-boggling because it is using 3,000% of the, to print notes. We know that these notes are printed abroad, so sometimes it costs a lot of money. Both the logistics of shipment, the logistics of clearing, and all our handling. We know that Nigerian security printing and minting company has folded off a very long time, which is a shame. So we spend a lot of money, much more money than the value of what is being printed, printing money. And that is not bad economy. That is not bad economic policy. I'm not sure that is not also going on with the regular currency printing and even printing of other security documents like the international passports, like the stamps and so on. So because of this kind of policy, Nigerian economy is being bleeded by these printing these legal tenders and security documents abroad, mainly in China. So that creates a problem, and there's no way anyone can justify that you are using 18 point something billion naira to print a money value to 680 million naira. It doesn't make any economic sense. But like I said, it is a bad policy. It was a bad policy, and that does not make it offense on its face value, unless there are some deals and some misappropriation of funds. But having said that, recall that the Nigeria Supreme Court, dealt with this case when some state governors, tried to ask the court to set aside this policy, and it was not as if the policy was not approved at the highest level at that time. So it's neither here nor there. The EFCC had to prove that there were some criminal offenses committed in this process.
All right, but Mr. Obiago, could you provide us some insight into the procedures and safeguards that are actually supposed to be in place to prevent unauthorized printing of our currency notes?
Well, the Central Bank Act has provided the procedure. They have the Central Bank Board who are supposed to approve policy issues. We also have the Monetary Policy Committee made up of key players in the economy who are supposed to discuss and approve any monetary policy, looking at the cost effectiveness and the prudence of the economy. And then also the president who has the final say in all this. So these three layers of approval process supposed to think through any policy proposed by the CBN and have it approved and then implemented. So it would be very surprising if Mr. Emefiele, while the CBN governor, unilaterally took a decision to redesign Naira. I mean, that is completely far-fetched. Nigerians would be shocked if that is the case, because there is a central bank board that's supposed to approve this policy and they have it implemented. And if they have looked at the costs of producing redesigned Naira, and it is really excessive, one would be surprised why collectively they will agree to do that. So there are processes. Now, if the FCC say that Mr. Emefiele didn't pass through those processes, then that's an offense of his own, because it means he bypassed the statutory stipulations to take unilateral action. So there are a number of complicated issues, legal issues, that may arise in the trial, and we all await the FCC to put in their evidence to see how Mr. Emefiele is guilty of those offenses.
I've been speaking with Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Chinua Obiago. Thank you so much for your perspectives and for talking to us on Newsweek. Thanks for staying with us. This week, the organized labor walked out of the minimum wage negotiations after rejecting an offer of 48,000 naira and 54,000 naira by the government and the organized private sector, respectively. The organized labor, comprising of the Nigeria Labour Congress and the Trade Union Congress of Nigeria, described government's proposition as offensive to the sensibilities of Nigerian workers and incapable of meeting the needs of an average worker. President of the NLC, Joe Ajero, stated that the government lacks sufficient data to negotiate terms with the union. He also maintained that government has till the 29th of May ultimatum to address the minimum wage issue before the union takes a decision on further line of action. Joining us to discuss this is Olufemi Lawson. He's Executive Director, Center for Public Accountability. He's with us in the studio. Mr. Lawson, good to have you here.
Good evening. It's my pleasure.
All right. Well, let's begin with what you think are the specific concerns, really, that, made the labor union to reject this proposal of 48,000 naira from government and 54,000 naira from organized private sector.
I think basically there are no two other ways than the current economic reality in the country. The truth, if it must be said, is that the current economic reality in the country does not in any way justify a minimum wage of 58, 54, or anything at that range being proposed by the federal government and the private sector as a minimum wage. Because when this discussion about the need for the increase in minimum wage started, we're not even at this point of economic challenge as a country. This came shortly after the new administration of President Tinubu came on board. There have been conversations around the need for increase. And minimum wage review is a statutory, constitutional matter that's to be taken to the National Assembly and all sort of things. So this issue has lingered even before today. But unfortunately, the challenges that has confronted the average Nigerian economically has been persistent. The challenges have remained not even same, but have worsened to the extent that the cost of living, even between the time that the conversation around the need for review of minimum wage started and now, has skyrocketed. So it becomes very unrealistic, even though offensive, as the Labour said, that government will be proposing between 48,000 and 54,000. The reality is that our current economic state, the current state of the living standard of our people, particularly Nigerian workers, does not in any way. In fact, earning 54,000 as at now will be more ridiculous than earning 35,000 naira when the discussions around minimum wage review started.
The organized labor even mentioned the fact that currently what appears to be the standard is like 77,000 naira, because based on the government intervention, workers are now ideally earning about 77,000 naira. So taking it back to 48,000 or 54,000 naira, they just termed as ridiculous.
Yeah, not only ridiculous, it will impose more hardship on the workers. It will not in any way better their lot, because the essence of this review of minimum wage is to make things better for the average Nigerian worker, is to improve their standard of living, is to improve their capacity to earn more and to be, of course, be able to do more from their wages. But taking them back to that rate being proposed by the government and the organized private sector means we are not really interested in the welfare of them. And if our workforce is not productive, we will not be productive as a nation. And we must not deceive ourselves about this. We need a productive workforce to become productive as a nation and to also earn more as a nation. And I think this is one of the fundamental issues that government must take seriously, other than some of the aspects that government is focusing on.
All right. Labour is proposing 615,000 naira. How practicable is that?
Well, of course, personally, I'm not under any illusion that that is realistic, considering the fact that as much as we want a living wage for our workers, as much as we want a better living standard for our workers, we must also be we must be conscious of the current economic strength of our nation. How well is our country? Is the country economically capable to fund a workforce that will earn 615,000 naira minimum wage? Of course, to me, that is not realistic. But I think government must come to the table with something more realistic, better than what is being proposed. And I'm very sure the labor unions will also have to shift the ground to the extent that both the labor union and government can arrive at a point that is a bit realistic, affordable for government to pay, and of course, comfortable for the average Nigerian workers to survive on as a living wage.
Mm. So many had great expectations from the organized private sector. They felt that even if the federal government wouldn't propose something massive, organized private sector should step up. But they proposed 54,000 naira.
The private sector may not also be thriving when government is not thriving. Most of the prosperity of the private sector becomes attached to how efficient government is. If you look at what the administration has been doing, the Tinubu administration has been doing a lot in encouraging private sector participation, private sector, economic boost and all sort of things. See, the private sector would not operate in isolation. If the government policies, if the government programs, if the economic policies of the country are not favorable to the private sector will become so impotent that may not even be able to pay as much as the government is, as government is paying. So even the private sector needs the government policies and programs to enhance its productivity and capacity to pay this, 54,000 that it is proposing. So we cannot look at it from the point of, private sector is willing. Private sector is only hoping to pay more than the government on the basis of the fact that government will encourage productivity, government will make the private sector to be more productive and they could earn more. And remember that they have lesser workforce than the government in most cases, particularly in most states of the federation. So it is not absolutely, correct to think, maybe the private sector is demonstrating more capacity to pay more than the government.
All right, and if government was, just waiting to see the body language of
the
private sector, right? Okay, would continue in a moment. But finally on the show, the Academic Staff Union of Universities threatens to down tools if the federal government fails to pay public university lecturers their 2022 without salaries. That's about 2 years ago. President of the association, Professor Emmanuel Oshudeke, noted that public universities have so far covered the work for the period that they were on strike and should be duly paid. He added that having covered the work for the period public universities were on strike, it would be unfair of government to hold on to salaries of lecturers. ASU issued a 2-week ultimatum to the government, and that began on 13th of May 2024 to respond to the allegations of the union. I still have Olufemi Lawson with me here in the studio. Well, it's staring us right in the face. Government is talking about no work, no pay. Now, ASU says no pay, no work. How do you react to that?
No, this was actually not the policy of this administration. It was inherited from, and you recall that that was about some 7.5 months salaries. When this administration came, about 4 months of those outstanding were cleared, and now it's just about 3 months or thereabout outstanding salaries that the government is here to pay. And you see, we must take education not just as a priority by the virtue of giving scholarship loans and some of these subsidies. The engine room, the driving force behind the quality of our education are these teachers, particularly in our tertiary institutions. And I think we have had too much of this dispute between university teachers and the government. For God's sake, I think irrespective of how government perceive ASU has been excessive sometimes in their approach, which some of us may not naturally agree with, I think government must look at the end product of the commitment of ASU to our development as a nation and begin to at least give some priorities to education through the demands of our university lecturers. It is quite ridiculous when you hear what the average Nigerian university teacher earns. And upon all this, you have to go through disputes, have meetings, argue on salaries, on allowances, as if, and this is a government that is showing commitment to education. This is a government that is promising subsidies, that is giving, a loan, that is promising all sort of encouragement. Then how do you give loan to students? How do you, support infrastructures in the universities and all sort of things without motivating those people who will drive the engine? You can build the infrastructures. You can build the skyscrapers in the universities. You can actually give billions of naira in loans to students. But when there are no teachers, then they become vehicles that are immobile. Because without these teachers, so I think the administration must prioritize the interests of the teachers and begin to engage constructively ASU on the need to, in fact, it is now that government must not even see ASU as a union in the university, but as partners to actually achieve its mission to us. If the administration is interested in genuinely advancing the course of education in Nigeria, I think ASU is one body that the government must partner with, not just engage. ASU must be seen as a partner. Government should pay this due. Like ASU president said, lecturers have worked overtime over the last couple of months. A lot of them have not even gone on leave because they have to cover up for the times, expended on the strike and so on. I think it is not too much for the federal government to consider payment of this outstanding 3 months or thereabout. We spend so much on Hajj, on subsidy, on this, on making our legislators in the National Assembly comfortable and the likes. But why is it difficult for us to, show such commitment to education? I think this is a challenge to the administration, and it must see the need to begin to see ASU as a structure that can help the federal government in achieving its objective. Federal government has basically want to give loan to our students, want to give scholarship, want to encourage, want to build infrastructures. There is a lot of budgetary provision for infrastructure on our universities. But we need to bring ASU on board as partners.
All right.
Until federal government begin to do that, you can build all the structures, you can give all the loans. Our institutions, our education will not get better if we don't encourage the teachers.
Already, ASU has now given the federal government a 2-week ultimatum.
Sure.
and that should elapse by 28th or 29th of May, which would be the first anniversary
of the
government. So where are we headed? What should government do to fix this such that it does not negatively impact the student and take us back where we're coming from?
I'm quite sure that the administration will engage ASU, unlike the previous administration. The Tinubu administration have shown the tendency to engage unions, stakeholders, and even sectors that are aggrieved anytime such issues like this. I'm very sure that in the next couple of days, the administration will be engaging ASU, and I want to believe that it must be, begin to redefine the relationship between government and university lecturers beyond this, employee and employers, relationship.
All right, but then I know you have made a case for ASU to be considered as a partner to be brought on board, but then the government talks about facing some financial constraints. So how do we, justify the need to bring out some lump sum to pay some outstanding arrears?
Lump sum as in how much? It's a country that is subsidizing pilgrimage, country that is subsidizing, giving palliative to farmers, to food, country that is even giving loan to states. It shouldn't be difficult for us to subsidize education if it looks like a subsidy or if it looks so difficult for the government to do. This is about the future of the country. We are talking about the most productive sector of our country. So we must, no matter the pain, and for a government that is often showing the readiness to promote education, boost the capacity of our students and university and tertiary institutions, I don't think it should be so painful, irrespective of how broke, in code, the country may look like, for the country to consider some of these issues, particularly the welfare of our university teachers that is becoming an issue repeatedly.
And you know what happens sometimes with some of these demands? Once ASU comes forward and government listens, okay, NASU comes forward, NMA comes forward, medical association.
Why does it look like that? Most times, like I said, it's usually like an employer-employee relationship. The moment government begin to engage ASU as stakeholders, as partners, the moment government begin to engage these unions as co-travelers in the journey to build our educational institutions, I know a lot of them will also reconsider their approach to negotiation when they know that they have stake in building these institutions. I think there will be lesser tensions than we are currently experiencing because they will now begin to see themselves as stakeholders, as partners in the project, not as just employees of the government.
Executive Director, Center for Public Accountability, Olufemi Lawson. Thank you so much for being with us on the show today. Well, that's our show for today. Remember, you can follow the conversation on our social media platforms at TVC News NG and on our website, tvcnews.tv. I am Abosede Adeniro Aderemi. Bye for now. They have a great week ahead.